My crush humiliated me publicly, made everyone watch. 7 months later, she was the one getting rejected. The cafeteria went silent in waves, starting from the table where I was standing and spreading outward like ripples on water until 400 students were staring at me. Natalie Quinn held the microphone they'd been using for pep rally announcements, her perfectly manicured hand steady while mine shook, holding the bouquet of roses I'd spent $30 on. She'd just read my love letter out loud to the entire school, complete with dramatic pauses and mocking emphasis on the parts where I'd called her beautiful and said I'd been too nervous to tell her in person how I felt. Her friends were recording on their phones, their laughter cutting through the silence like knives. I stood there frozen, watching her smile get wider as she asked the crowd if anyone thought she should date the guy who quoted video game dialogue in a love letter, who genuinely believed they had a special connection because she'd smiled at him in the hallway a few times. The roses fell from my hands and scattered across the floor, red petals separating from stems, and I ran. I actually ran out of the cafeteria, while hundreds of people laughed and recorded and shared, and that video had 15,000 views before I even made it to my car in the parking lot. I'd been planning that confession for 3 months, ever since the start of junior year at Westfield High. Natalie was the kind of beautiful that made you stupid, all blonde hair and blue eyes, and the sort of confidence that came from knowing everyone wanted to be near you. She was a cheerleader, obviously, and president of the student council, and genuinely smart in a way that made her even more intimidating. We'd been in the same English class sophomore year, and she'd laughed at a joke I made during a group discussion once, really laughed, and I'd built an entire fantasy around that single moment of connection. This year, we had AP chemistry together, and she'd asked to borrow a pen 3 times, said thank you with this smile that made my chest tight, and I'd convinced myself it meant something. My best friend Dylan had warned me I was reading too much into basic human politeness, but I didn't listen. I wrote her a letter instead of asking in person because I thought it would be romantic, like something from the movies she probably watched. I left it in her locker with the roses attached, and apparently she'd thought it was hilarious enough to share with the entire school during lunch period. The video went viral within hours, spreading beyond our school to neighboring districts, and then to random strangers on the internet who loved watching teenagers get humiliated. Someone had edited it with sad music and reaction shots from movies, making it even more mockable. My phone exploded with notifications, tags, and shares and comments calling me pathetic and creepy and delusional. People I'd never met were analyzing the letter I'd written, posting screenshots with my cringiest lines highlighted and laughing about how I'd thought I had a chance with someone like Natalie Quinn. My Instagram and Snapchat became flooded with messages, half of them from people offering fake sympathy, and the other half from people telling me I should have known better than to aim so far out of my league. I turned my phone off entirely around 4 in the afternoon and sat in my room staring at the wall, trying to process the fact that the worst moment of my life was now entertainment for thousands of strangers. My mom knocked on my door around 6 and asked if I wanted dinner. I told her I wasn't hungry. She came in anyway and sat on the edge of my bed, not saying anything at first, just being there. Eventually, I told her what happened, and I watched her face cycle through shock and anger and sadness. She asked if I wanted her to call the school, to report Natalie for bullying or harassment or whatever this qualified as. I said no, that would just make it worse, make me look like I couldn't handle my own problems. She said that what Natalie did was cruel and wrong, that reading someone's private feelings out loud for entertainment was bullying regardless of how I'd felt about her or what I'd written. She said I deserved better than someone who would do that to another person, and that she was sorry this had happened to me. I appreciated her trying, but her comfort didn't change the fact that I'd become a viral joke before the end of my junior year. Dylan came over that night without being invited, let himself in through the side door my family never locked, and found me still sitting in the dark, staring at nothing. He didn't ask if I was okay because the answer was obvious. He just sat down next to me on the floor and said that Natalie Quinn was a garbage human being and everyone who'd laughed was complicit in some seriously messed up behavior. He showed me his phone where he'd been arguing with people in the comments of the video, defending me and calling out how toxic the whole situation was. Most people had ignored him or called him a white knight, but a few had actually agreed that publicly humiliating someone over a love letter was way over the line. It didn't make me feel much better, but it helped to know at least one person was on my side. Dylan stayed until almost midnight, mostly in silence, occasionally making dark jokes about how this would make a great college essay about overcoming adversity. I managed half a smile at that, the first genuine expression I'd made in hours. If you are enjoying this story already, please subscribe to see more stories like this. School the next day was exactly as awful as I'd imagined. People stared at me in the hallways, some openly pointing and whispering, others trying to be subtle but failing. Someone had printed out screenshots from the video and taped them to lockers near mine with captions like Romeo of Westfield High and Love Letter Fail. I tore them down and threw them away, but more appeared by third period. In chemistry, Natalie sat 3 rows ahead of me like always, surrounded by her friends, and I could see them glancing back at me and giggling. The teacher, Mr. Raymond Foster, a 38-year-old with 15 years of teaching experience according to his classroom bio poster, noticed the tension and spent the first 5 minutes of class giving a pointed lecture about respect and treating classmates with dignity. Natalie rolled her eyes but stayed quiet. After class, Mr. Foster asked me to stay behind for a moment. He closed the door after the other students filtered out and asked me directly if I was okay, if I needed to talk to someone about what had happened yesterday. I said I was fine, which was obviously a lie, but I didn't know what else to say. Mr. Foster said he'd seen the video, that several teachers had seen it, and there were discussions happening at the administrative level about how to address it. He said what Natalie did was bullying and potentially violated the school's code of conduct, and if I wanted to file a formal complaint, there would be support for that. I told him I just wanted everyone to forget about it, that making a big official thing would keep it alive longer. He nodded but said the offer stood if I changed my mind, and he gave me his email address in case I needed anything. I appreciated his concern, even though I knew nothing any teacher could do would undo the damage already done to my reputation. Lunch was the worst part. I couldn't face going to the cafeteria where it had happened, where people would stare and remember and probably record me for round 2 of the entertainment. Dylan suggested we eat in his car, so we did, sitting in the parking lot with fast food and trying to pretend everything was normal. He showed me that the video now had 32,000 views and had been picked up by several of those aggregator accounts that posted cringe content. My full name was in the comments now, along with the name of our school, and people were finding my social media accounts and going through my old posts looking for more material to mock. I'd made my accounts private that morning, but the damage was already done. Dylan said I should report it to the platforms for harassment, and I said I would, knowing it wouldn't matter. The internet never forgot anything, and this was permanent now. The rest of that week blurred together in a haze of avoidance and humiliation. I started arriving to school right when the bell rang to avoid hallway time, ate lunch in my car every day, left immediately after last period. I stopped participating in class discussions, stopped making eye contact with anyone, tried to make myself as invisible as possible. My grades started slipping because I couldn't focus on homework when my brain was constantly replaying that moment in the cafeteria on loop. Natalie and her friends continued acting like nothing had happened, laughing and socializing and living their lives while mine felt like it was falling apart. I started having nightmares about public humiliation, variations on the same theme where I was exposed and mocked in front of crowds that grew larger every time. My parents suggested I talk to the school counselor, Dr. Melissa Nguyen, a woman in her early 50s with a PhD in adolescent psychology and 22 years of experience working with teenagers. I resisted at first because it felt like admitting I couldn't handle this on my own, but after 2 weeks of barely sleeping and barely eating, I agreed to one session. Dr. Nguyen's office was small and filled with plants and motivational posters that would normally make me roll my eyes, but in the moment felt almost comforting. She asked me to tell her what happened in my own words, so I did, explaining everything from the initial crush to the letter, to the public reading, to the viral video, to the ongoing harassment. She listened without interrupting, occasionally taking notes, and when I finished, she said that what I was experiencing was a normal response to a traumatic public humiliation. She explained that having your private feelings exposed and mocked in front of hundreds of people, then having that moment preserved and shared online indefinitely, was a form of psychological trauma that shouldn't be minimized. She said the shame and anxiety I was feeling were valid responses, and that I shouldn't feel weak for struggling with this. She asked if I'd like her to facilitate a mediation between me and Natalie, where we could discuss the impact of her actions in a controlled environment. I said absolutely not, that I never wanted to speak to Natalie Quinn again as long as I lived. Dr. Nguyen said she understood and asked if I'd consider filing a formal complaint with the administration that what Natalie did likely violated several school policies around bullying and harassment. I said I'd think about it, which was code for no, but I didn't want to argue about it. Dr. Nguyen also recommended I start documenting everything, keeping screenshots of harassing messages, noting incidents at school, building a record in case things escalated, or I decided to pursue action later. She gave me printouts about dealing with online harassment and managing anxiety, along with her office hours if I wanted to talk again. I took the papers and thanked her, feeling slightly better for having said everything out loud to someone whose job was to actually listen. On my way out, she mentioned that several other students had also come to her expressing concern about the incident, saying they thought what happened to me was wrong and they didn't know how to help. Knowing that not everyone thought I deserved it helped a little, though it didn't change the fact that most people had either laughed or stayed silent. 3 weeks after the incident, Principal Daniel Thornton called me into his office during 4th period. He was a man in his late 50s who'd been principal at Westfield for 9 years, formerly a teacher and athletic director before that. He had a reputation for being fair, but no nonsense, the type who actually enforced rules instead of just talking about them. He asked me to sit down and said he wanted to discuss what had happened in the cafeteria, that the administrative team had been reviewing the incident and determining appropriate responses. He said they'd spoken with Natalie and several of her friends, reviewed the video evidence, and consulted with the district's legal team about liability and policy violations. I sat there feeling my stomach twist, wondering if I was about to get in trouble somehow for writing the letter in the first place. Principal Thornton said that Natalie's actions constituted bullying under the school's code of conduct, specifically the sections about public humiliation and harassment. He said she would be facing disciplinary consequences, including suspension from student council leadership, removal from upcoming cheerleading performances, and mandatory participation in restorative justice counseling. He said her friends, who had participated in recording and laughing, would receive written warnings and mandatory assemblies about digital citizenship and cyberbullying. He asked how I felt about those consequences, and I honestly didn't know. Part of me felt vindicated that she was being punished, but another part felt like it wasn't enough, that a few missed cheerleading events didn't undo the fact that my humiliation was permanent and online forever. I told Principal Thornton I appreciated the school taking it seriously, and he said they were also implementing new policies about student use of PA equipment and microphones to prevent similar incidents in the future. Natalie's suspension from student council made waves through the school. Her friends were furious, claiming she was being punished too harshly for what they called a joke that I'd taken too seriously. Some students started a petition demanding the administration reverse the decision, saying that schools shouldn't police student relationships and that I'd put myself out there publicly, so the response was fair game. The petition got about 200 signatures before Principal Thornton shut it down and sent a school-wide email clarifying that bullying and public humiliation weren't protected speech or acceptable behavior under any circumstances. The email made things worse in some ways because it drew attention back to the incident right when it was starting to fade from daily conversation. More people took sides, and I became a divisive figure without wanting to be, split between those who thought Natalie got what she deserved and those who thought I was too sensitive and had gotten her in trouble over nothing. Dylan remained my only consistent friend through all of this. Most of my other casual friends had distanced themselves, not wanting to be associated with the social pariah I'd become. I couldn't entirely blame them since high school social politics were ruthless, and being seen with me probably came with risks to their own reputations. But it hurt anyway, realizing how conditional most friendships were. Dylan never wavered, sitting with me at lunch every day, walking with me between classes when our schedules aligned, actively defending me when people made comments in his presence. He said real friends showed up when things got hard, and anyone who disappeared now had never really been my friend in the first place. I knew he was right, but that didn't make the loneliness any easier. My parents stayed concerned and involved, checking in with me daily about how school was going and whether I needed anything. My dad, who normally wasn't great at emotional conversations, told me that high school was temporary and that none of this would matter in 5 years, which felt impossible to believe, but was nice to hear anyway. My mom kept offering to let me transfer schools or switch to online classes for the rest of the year if being at Westfield was too painful. I considered it seriously for a while, but ultimately decided that running away would feel like letting Natalie win. I'd done nothing wrong by telling someone I liked them, and I shouldn't have to upend my entire life because she'd decided to be cruel about it. So I stayed, even though every day felt like walking through hostile territory. Around the 6-week mark, something shifted inside me. I was sitting in my room one Saturday morning, scrolling through college websites and thinking about my future, when I realized I was letting this one incident define my entire existence. I'd stopped doing things I enjoyed, stopped making plans, stopped thinking about anything beyond just surviving each school day. Natalie Quinn had humiliated me, but I was the one keeping that humiliation alive by letting it control every aspect of my life. That realization hit me hard enough that I actually sat up straighter in my chair, feeling something like anger start to burn through the shame I'd been carrying. I'd given her way too much power over me, and it was time to take some of that power back. I started small. I rejoined the coding club I'd quit after the incident, forcing myself to show up even though walking into that room full of people felt like torture the first few times. Most of the club members were decent about it, either not mentioning what had happened or offering quick sympathetic comments before moving on to actual club business. Focusing on programming projects gave me something productive to channel my energy into, and being good at something again helped rebuild the confidence that had been completely destroyed. I started going to the gym at 5:30 every morning before school, using the physical exertion as a way to manage the anxiety that still spiked every time I walked through Westfield's doors. The gym was mostly empty that early, just me and a few dedicated athletes and adult members, and the anonymity of it felt safe. The workouts became addictive in a good way. I'd never been particularly athletic, had always been more of a books and computers guy, but pushing my body to its limits and then past them gave me a sense of control I desperately needed. I started researching proper form and nutrition, tracking my progress in a notebook, setting incremental goals that I could actually achieve. Within a month, I could see physical changes, my shoulders getting broader, and my arms showing actual definition. The changes were small but visible, and they represented something larger than just aesthetics. They were proof that I could set a goal and accomplish it, that I had agency over at least some parts of my life. Dylan noticed and asked if I was becoming one of those fitness-obsessed people, and I said maybe, but in a way that was helping me cope, so he should let it happen. My grades started improving too once I redirected my focus. I'd been letting them slip out of depression and lack of motivation, but I realized that tanking my GPA would only hurt my future while doing nothing to address my current situation. I started actually doing my homework again, participating in class discussions, meeting with teachers during office hours when I needed help understanding material. Mr. Foster in chemistry was particularly supportive, going out of his way to encourage my contributions and treating me like a normal student instead of the kid from the viral video. That normalization helped more than he probably knew, letting me remember that I was a person with interests and capabilities beyond just being Natalie Quinn's victim. If this story keeps your interest, please subscribe to get more stories like this. By December, 3 months after the incident, I'd transformed enough that people at school started treating me differently. The daily stares and whispers had mostly died down, replaced by casual indifference which felt like a massive upgrade. Some people who'd avoided me started saying hi in the hallways again, testing whether I was still radioactive or if enough time had passed that association was safe. I was polite but distant, remembering who'd disappeared when things got bad. My body had changed noticeably from the morning workouts, and I'd started dressing better too, replacing my usual worn jeans and t-shirts with clothes that actually fit properly and looked intentional. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about feeling like someone who had their life together instead of someone who was barely holding on. The real shift came in January when I started talking to Caitlin Shepard. She was a junior like me, on the debate team, and had a reputation for being sharp and funny and not caring about the usual high school popularity hierarchies. We'd been in the same Spanish class freshman year, but had never really talked beyond basic classmate small talk. She approached me in the library one afternoon while I was working on a coding project and asked what I was building. I explained it was a program to help students track assignment deadlines across multiple classes, and she said that was actually useful and could I make her a copy when it was done. We ended up talking for 20 minutes about school and programming and completely random topics, and it felt shockingly normal, like I was just a regular person having a conversation, not the guy from that video. Caitlin and I started studying together regularly after that, meeting in the library or at coffee shops and working on our respective homework while chatting about whatever. She knew about the Natalie incident, everyone did, but she never brought it up or treated me like I was damaged goods. She just treated me like a person, which sounds basic, but felt revolutionary after months of being defined entirely by one humiliating moment. We had similar senses of humor and similar taste in movies and music, and being around her was easy in a way nothing had been for months. Dylan approved, saying Caitlin was cool and smart, and I should definitely pursue that if I was interested. I wasn't sure if I was ready to be interested in anyone romantically after what happened with Natalie, but I liked Caitlin's company, and that felt like enough for now. February brought Valentine's Day, which I'd been dreading since December. Last year, I'd spent weeks planning how I might ask someone out, which had eventually led to the letter to Natalie and the subsequent disaster. This year, I was determined to let the day pass unmarked, just another Thursday to survive and move past. Except Caitlin asked me to be her Valentine, casually, over coffee 3 days before the actual holiday. She said she knew Valentine's Day was probably a loaded topic for me, but she thought we could go see a movie and get dinner and just hang out as friends, or maybe more than friends if I was interested in that. She said there was no pressure, and I could absolutely say no, but she thought I should know she liked me and would be interested in dating if I felt the same way. I stared at her for probably 10 full seconds while my brain tried to process that someone was asking me out, genuinely and sincerely, without any ulterior motives or jokes. I said yes. We went to dinner and a movie on Valentine's Day, and it was awkward in all the normal first date ways that had nothing to do with my previous trauma. Caitlin was nervous and talked too fast. I was nervous and kept making weird jokes that didn't quite land. We both relaxed eventually and had a genuinely good time. She didn't try to kiss me at the end of the night, just hugged me and said she'd had fun and wanted to do it again soon. I agreed and meant it. Dating Caitlin felt completely different from the fantasy I'd built up around Natalie. This was based on actual conversations and shared interests and spending time together, not projecting my desires onto someone who barely knew I existed. It felt real in a way the Natalie situation never had, and that was both scary and exciting. Word spread through school that Caitlin and I were dating, and the reaction was mostly indifferent shrugs from people who didn't care about my love life. A few people made comments suggesting Caitlin was settling, or that I should be careful not to mess this up too, but they were in the minority. Mostly people moved on to other gossip, more current drama involving other students. I was old news, which was exactly what I'd been hoping for. Being in a real relationship helped me process some of the feelings I'd been carrying about the Natalie incident too. Caitlin helped me understand that what I'd felt for Natalie wasn't actually love, it was infatuation and projection, building an entire fantasy around someone I didn't really know. She pointed out that I'd never had an actual conversation with Natalie beyond basic pleasantries, had never learned about her interests or values or personality beyond her surface appearance. I'd been in love with the idea of her, not the actual person, which made the rejection sting less somehow. March arrived, and with it came Spring Fling, Westfield High's semi-formal dance that was second only to prom in terms of social importance. Caitlin asked if I wanted to go with her, and I hesitated. Dances meant crowds of people and social situations and potential for things to go wrong. The last time I'd tried to publicly express romantic interest in someone, it had ended in viral humiliation. Caitlin saw me thinking and said we absolutely didn't have to go, that we could do something else that night, that she wasn't trying to push me into uncomfortable situations. I appreciated that she got it, but I also realized I couldn't avoid every social event for the rest of high school because of what Natalie had done. I told Caitlin I'd go to Spring Fling with her, and she smiled and kissed my cheek and said we'd have fun. Buying tickets to Spring Fling meant standing in line outside the student council office during lunch period. I was waiting with Caitlin, talking about what we might wear, when I heard a familiar voice behind me, Natalie Quinn, asking someone if the ticket line was moving. I hadn't spoken to her directly since before the cafeteria incident, and my whole body tensed up. Caitlin noticed and squeezed my hand reassuringly. We were 3 people ahead of Natalie in line, close enough that I could hear her talking to her friend about how excited she was for the dance, how she'd bought a new dress and gotten asked by some guy I didn't know. Her voice was the same as it had been that day in the cafeteria, confident and carrying, not a trace of awareness that she'd destroyed someone standing 10 feet away from her. We got our tickets and left without incident, but something about hearing Natalie's voice again triggered all the buried anger I'd been trying to process constructively. That night I told Caitlin everything I'd been feeling, all the rage and humiliation and helplessness that I'd been pushing down for months. She listened without judgment and then said that what Natalie had done to me was unforgivable, and that me healing and moving on didn't mean I had to absolve her or pretend it was okay. She said it was completely valid to still be angry about it, and that anger could coexist with my healing process. Hearing that permission to still be angry helped somehow, like I didn't have to pretend to be completely over something that had genuinely traumatized me just because time had passed. Spring Fling night arrived on March 28th. Caitlin looked beautiful in a dark green dress that matched her eyes, and I'd rented a suit that actually fit properly and made me look like someone who had their life together. We met up with Dylan and his date, along with a few other friends from coding club and debate team, and went to dinner before the dance. Everyone was relaxed and happy, making jokes and taking photos and just enjoying being teenagers at a semi-formal event. It felt normal and good, and I caught myself thinking that maybe I really was moving past the Natalie thing, that maybe high school wouldn't be entirely defined by that one awful moment. We arrived at the school gym around 8:30, where the dance was already in full swing with terrible DJ music and colored lights, and way too many people crammed into a space too small for comfortable dancing. Caitlin and I danced for a while, or more accurately, we swayed near each other while music played, both of us being too self-conscious to actually dance well. It was fun anyway, being part of the crowd instead of outside it, participating in a normal high school experience without drama or humiliation. Around 9:15, we took a break to get water from the refreshment table, and that's when I saw Natalie across the gym. She was standing with her date, a senior on the basketball team who looked uncomfortable and kept checking his phone. They weren't talking or dancing, just existing in the same space without much interaction. Her face looked tense in a way I'd never seen before, like she was forcing herself to smile when she'd rather be anywhere else. I watched as her date said something to her and walked away toward the exit, leaving her standing alone in her expensive dress with her perfect hair, and something about her expression made me pause. Then I saw her date leave the gym entirely, pulling out his phone as he headed toward the parking lot. Natalie followed him to the doorway, saying something I couldn't hear over the music, and he turned around and said something back that made her face crumple. I couldn't resist moving closer, telling Caitlin I'd be right back and navigating through the crowd until I was within earshot. Natalie's date was telling her that he'd only asked her to Spring Fling because his friends had dared him to, that he'd never been actually interested in her and was leaving to go to a real party with people he actually liked. He said she was boring and self-absorbed and not even that hot when you actually talked to her. He said this would be funny later when he told everyone how she'd actually thought he was into her. And then he left, walking out to the parking lot while Natalie stood there frozen in the doorway watching him go. The parallels weren't lost on me. Someone using social pressure and performance to humiliate Natalie in front of witnesses, making her feel small and stupid for believing someone cared about her. Someone turning her feelings into entertainment for others. Someone walking away while she stood there processing that she'd been a joke the whole time. I stood about 15 feet from her, watching her face cycle through shock and hurt and embarrassment, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, no sense of justice served. Just a kind of empty recognition that humiliation hurt, regardless of who experienced it or whether they'd earned it through previous behavior. People around us were starting to notice, whispers spreading through the nearby crowd as they realized Natalie Quinn had just been publicly rejected and ditched at Spring Fling. Natalie's eyes found mine across the space between us. For a second, we just looked at each other, two people who'd been on opposite ends of public humiliation, now connected by that shared experience whether we wanted to be or not. I saw her eyes fill with tears, and then she was pushing past me, heading toward the bathrooms, her friends scrambling after her asking what happened. The crowd shifted back toward dancing and socializing, the moment already becoming gossip to share later. I stood there processing what I'd just witnessed, trying to figure out how I felt about it. Dylan appeared next to me and asked if I'd seen what just happened with Natalie, saying karma was real and she'd finally gotten what she deserved. I nodded vaguely, still not sure if I agreed. Caitlin found me a minute later and said she'd seen the whole thing, asked if I was okay. I told her honestly that I didn't know how I felt. Part of me thought Dylan was right, that Natalie experiencing humiliation was just consequences catching up to her. But another part recognized that creating more hurt didn't undo the hurt I'd experienced, that her being rejected publicly didn't make my humiliation any less real or permanent. We left the dance early, Caitlin and I, and went to get food at a diner where we could talk without shouting over music. I told her I thought I was supposed to feel satisfied or vindicated seeing Natalie get hurt, but instead I just felt tired of the whole situation. She said that probably meant I was actually healing, that I'd processed enough of my own pain that I didn't need revenge to feel better. The story of Natalie's public rejection spread through school, just like my story had, complete with videos posted online and people analyzing what had happened and taking sides. Her friends defended her on social media, saying her date was an asshole and she deserved better, that she'd been genuinely interested in him and he'd let her on. Other people said she'd gotten exactly what she'd done to me, that experiencing humiliation might teach her some empathy. A few people drew direct comparisons to the cafeteria incident with me, creating side-by-side screenshots of both situations and discussing karma and justice. The whole thing felt exhausting and cyclical, just more of the same cruelty dressed up as different circumstances. I stayed out of the online discussions entirely, refusing to add my voice to the pile of commentary about Natalie's pain. On the Monday after spring fling, I was called to Dr. Nguyen's office during second period. I walked in expecting some routine check-in, but instead found Natalie Quinn sitting in one of the chairs across from the counselor's desk. My stomach dropped, and I almost turned around and left, but Dr. Nguyen asked me to please sit down, that this was important. I sat in the chair farthest from Natalie, not looking at her, wondering what fresh hell this was going to be. Dr. Nguyen said that Natalie had requested a mediated conversation with me, and that while I had no obligation to participate, she hoped I'd be willing to hear Natalie out. I started to say no automatically, but then Natalie spoke. Her voice was different than I'd ever heard it, quiet and raw like she'd been crying. She said she knew I had no reason to listen to her or care about anything she had to say, but she needed me to know that she was sorry for what she'd done to me. She said reading my letter out loud in the cafeteria was the worst thing she'd ever done to another person, and she'd spent 7 months watching the consequences of that choice ripple through both our lives. She said experiencing public humiliation herself had given her a fraction of understanding about what I'd gone through, and that even though her single instance of rejection didn't compare to having the moment preserved and shared online forever, it had been enough to make her realize how cruel she'd been. She said she didn't expect me to forgive her or even acknowledge her apology, but she needed to say it anyway because I deserved to hear that what she did was wrong and she regretted it completely. I sat there listening to her and trying to figure out if this was genuine or another performance. Dr. Nguyen must have seen my skepticism because she said Natalie had been meeting with her twice weekly since the spring fling incident to process what had happened and work on understanding her own behavior patterns. She said Natalie had written me a letter of apology that had gone through 3 drafts before meeting the standards for genuine accountability, not just empty sorry statements. She offered to give me the letter to read privately if I wasn't comfortable discussing this face-to-face. I looked at Natalie directly for the first time since sitting down and saw that she looked terrible. Dark circles under her eyes and her hair pulled back messily, none of the perfect polish she usually maintained. She looked like how I'd looked in the weeks after the cafeteria incident, like someone who wasn't sleeping well or taking care of themselves. I told Natalie I heard her apology, and I understood she was sorry. I said I appreciated her taking responsibility instead of making excuses or trying to minimize what she'd done, but I also said that her apology didn't undo anything, didn't erase the video or the harassment or the months of hell I'd gone through because of her choice. I said I was glad she'd learned something from experiencing public rejection herself, and I genuinely hoped she wouldn't treat another person the way she'd treated me, but I wasn't interested in absolving her or making her feel better about what she'd done, because that wasn't my responsibility. Dr. Nguyen nodded like I'd said something exactly right, and Natalie just sat there looking down at her hands. She said she understood and she wasn't asking for forgiveness, just wanted me to know that she knew what she'd done was wrong. I stood up and said we were done here, and left the counseling office without looking back. The encounter stayed with me for days afterward, settling into my thoughts during quiet moments. Caitlin asked how it went, and I told her everything, trying to articulate how weird it felt to receive an apology that I'd needed for months, but now that I had it, it changed nothing about my actual life. She said that sometimes apologies were more about the person giving them than the person receiving them, that Natalie probably needed to apologize for her own healing process. I thought about that and realized it was probably true, that my acceptance or rejection of her apology mattered less than the fact that she'd taken accountability. It still didn't make us even or fix what was broken, but it was something. School continued toward the end of junior year, with increasing focus on standardized tests and college preparation. I scored a 1,480 on my SAT, applied for early admission to several universities with strong computer science programs, and maintained a 3.8 GPA despite everything that had happened during the year. Caitlin and I stayed together through finals and into summer, our relationship deepening into something serious and stable. Dylan graduated and left for college in August, but we stayed in touch through messaging and occasional video calls. My parents remained supportive and proud, telling me regularly how impressed they were with how I'd handled everything and come out stronger. The workouts I'd started in November became a permanent part of my routine, something I did for my mental health as much as my physical fitness. The viral video was still out there, still searchable if anyone knew what to look for, but it had faded from active circulation. New humiliations and dramas had replaced mine in the content cycle, other teenagers becoming temporary entertainment for strangers. I'd learned to live with knowing that moment existed permanently on the internet, that anyone who really wanted to could find it and judge me for it. But I'd also learned that I was more than that moment, that my life and identity weren't defined by Natalie Quinn's cruelty or my response to it. I was someone who coded useful programs and maintained good grades and treated people with respect and showed up for the people I cared about. The humiliation had happened to me, but it wasn't who I was. Senior year started with a strange sense of possibility. Natalie had transferred to a different school over the summer, apparently unable to face another year at Westfield after the spring fling incident and its aftermath. I felt relieved knowing I wouldn't have to see her in the hallways or share classes with her, but I also felt a strange kind of sadness for her. She'd learned the same lesson I had about the permanent nature of public humiliation, about how one bad moment could alter the trajectory of your entire high school experience. I didn't wish continued suffering on her, didn't need her to keep paying for what she'd done to me. I just wanted to move forward with my life and let the past stay in the past. Caitlin and I applied to several of the same universities, both hoping to end up on the East Coast studying our respective fields. We talked about the future in concrete terms now, making plans that extended beyond just the next few months. My relationship with her had shown me what healthy romantic connection actually looked like, built on mutual respect and genuine knowledge of each other rather than projection and fantasy. When she looked at me, she saw who I actually was, all my strengths and flaws and ordinary qualities, and she chose me anyway. That felt revolutionary after spending so long thinking I needed to be perfect or extraordinary to deserve love and attention. Dylan visited during Thanksgiving break his freshman year of college, and we caught up over pizza in my room like old times. He said college was everything he'd hoped it would be, and that high school already felt like ancient history, even though it had only been a few months. He asked if I ever thought about the Natalie situation anymore, and I said honestly, not very often. It had been over a year since the cafeteria incident, and while I'd never forget it completely, it had settled into the background of my life, rather than dominating the foreground. Dylan said he was proud of me for not letting it destroy me, for building something good out of something terrible. I thanked him for staying when other people had left, and he said that's what real friends did. They showed up when things got hard. I got my early admission acceptance to MIT in mid-December, a full scholarship covering tuition and room and board. Caitlin got into Princeton a week later with similar financial aid. We celebrated together, already making plans about how we'd visit each other on weekends and breaks, figuring out the logistics of maintaining a relationship when we'd be in different states. My parents were thrilled and emotional, taking about 100 photos of me holding my acceptance letter and posting them on social media with proud parent captions. Mr. Foster sent me a congratulatory email saying he'd always known I was capable of great things, and he was glad to see me achieving them. Dr. Nguyen stopped me in the hallway to offer her congratulations and say she was happy to see me thriving after everything I'd been through. Prom came in April, and Caitlin and I went together with a group of friends from various social circles I'd built throughout senior year. I'd gone from someone who'd been socially isolated and defined by humiliation to someone with a solid friend group and healthy relationship and clear future plans. The transformation wasn't just physical, though the continued workouts had left me notably more fit and confident in how I carried myself. The transformation was internal, a fundamental shift in how I understood myself and my worth. I'd learned that rejection and humiliation, while painful, weren't fatal, that people could be cruel and unfair, and you could survive it and build something good anyway. That revenge and vindication were less satisfying than just living well and moving forward. We took photos before prom at someone's house, all of us dressed up and happy, and I looked at those pictures later thinking about how different I looked compared to a year earlier. Not just the obvious physical changes, but something in my expression, a kind of settled confidence that hadn't been there before. Someone in our group mentioned how wild it was that we were all about to graduate and go off to college and start completely new lives. And I thought about how I'd already started a new life once, how I'd rebuilt myself after public destruction, and doing it again in a new city with new people didn't seem scary at all. It seemed like just another challenge I was capable of meeting. Graduation day arrived on June 5th, sunny and warm with hundreds of families crowding the football field to watch their students accept diplomas. I walked across the stage when my name was called, accepted the diploma from Principal Thornton, and moved my tassel from right to left while my parents cheered in the stands. I looked out at the crowd and felt genuinely grateful for everything, the good and the bad, because all of it had combined to make me who I'd become. Someone who knew how to fall and get back up. Someone who understood that other people's cruelty said more about them than it did about me. Someone who'd survived the worst moment of his life and built something better on the other side. After the ceremony, my parents took me out for dinner at my favorite restaurant, and we talked about the future, about college and career possibilities, and all the exciting unknowns ahead. My dad made a toast about being proud of the man I'd become, and my mom got emotional talking about how far I'd come since that awful day in the cafeteria. I appreciated their support and recognition, but I also knew the real work had been mine. They'd provided safety and resources, but I'd done the actual rebuilding, the painful process of reconstructing my self-worth from rubble. That was something no one could give me or take away, something I'd earned through months of showing up and trying and refusing to let one person's cruelty define my entire existence. I never saw or spoke to Natalie Quinn again after that mediated session in Dr. Nguyen's office. I heard through social media that she'd gone to a state school somewhere on the West Coast, making a clean start far from the place where she'd both inflicted and experienced public humiliation. I hoped she was doing better, learning and growing and becoming someone who treated people with more kindness. But mostly I didn't think about her at all. She was a chapter in my story, an important one because of how it had catalyzed my transformation, but still just one chapter among many. The rest of the book was about everything I built afterward, all the good things that came from refusing to stay destroyed. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.